everyone, and thanks for joining us from whatever corner of the garden you find yourself this evening in. My name is Christine Kennedy, and I work in the Office of Alumni Engagement at McMaster. And for those of you tuning in from Southern Ontario, you know today was not a nice garden day. It was cold and miserable. I went out and walked my dog this morning, and it was actually snowing a little bit. It was quite sad. So because we are coming from the area around McMaster, I'm actually zooming to you from my home in Ancaster. I would like to take this moment to recognize and acknowledge that the land that we are on is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And it's very appropriate that we make that land acknowledgement because today we are talking about gardening, herb gardening, so mostly gardening inside, but you know, we need to be more in tune with the land and how we are stewards of the land. And so it's my pleasure this evening to introduce to you Sheila Gutierrez, Sheila, who is the garden program coordinator at Green Venture. And Green Venture is a wonderful not-for-profit organization here in Hamilton. And you know, part of their mission is to empower Hamiltonians to implement better and greener practices, both at home and within the community. So again, it comes back to that idea that we are responsible for the land and we need to be stewards of the land. So Sheila, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to hearing all about herb gardening, and not only the importance of herb gardening for fresh food, but also for our health and mental health, physical health, overall health. Take it away.
Thanks, Christine. So if you're here today, you probably read a little bit about my bio. A little bit about my background is I have a degree in psychology and social behavior. And then I did some graduate studies in Niagara College for environmental management and assessment. But my career path is a little interesting in that I didn't have any previous experience in gardening or farming. I previously worked in rehabilitation activity leader and as a nursing scheduler in a subacute psychiatric center. And then I got a little burnt out, and then I decided that I wanted to do something hands-on outside. And that brings us to date with my work at Green Venture. And now I dedicate my time to gardening full-time and growing things. So before getting started, I also want to just start today in gratitude. I'm really thankful to be able to work on the land with my hands and listen to the sound of birds and the bees buzzing around, and to really see the magic of a seed and how just one single seed can really produce so much food and foster community and nourish soil microbes and our own health. It's really just always so magical to me, season after season. So I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share. My video will turn off, unfortunately, but nonetheless, I am here. So hopefully you can see that. So I also want to start today with acknowledging the land. Green Venture sits just past the Green Hill, on Green Hill past the Red Hill at Eco House. And Eco House is situated on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Ottawakan nations within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And we acknowledge that Green Venture is also part of the agreement and are committed to being stewards of the land. And we further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So today we'll talk a little bit about gardening, the eco-social community aspects, Green Venture's long-standing history in the gardening space, and then dive into the history of herbs, growing them, and then a few of recommendations for containers, soil, harvesting, and preserving. But before getting started, I just wanted to start with this quote that I recently heard from a dear friend, and that's, "You do not need a field for a yield." And I wanted to start off with this because I really want to encourage you to start where you are. Today we'll talk about different types of gardening and spacing, But if there's one thing that you do take away from this, I hope it's this, that you really don't need a lot of space to have a yield. And I think that's really important for anyone wishing to garden, to know that you can start exactly where you are. So why do we garden? Many reasons. Some people do it for food, physical health, stress reduction. But when we think about gardening and communities, the impacts are vast. Through community gardens, local food is grown, often with permaculture systems that promote local sharing and take into account the natural ecosystems. Gardens are a welcoming place for people of all ages, abilities, and cultures. It helps promote healthy and physical activity and emotional well-being. And by producing food locally, communities become more resilient, helping individuals learn to be more self-sufficient in fun ways, and empowers residents to participate in their food system. And that's really beneficial because sometimes it feels like we are so far from that. So when we garden, we just become closer to reaching those sustainable goals. By integrating garden, urban, or agriculture into communities, there's a capacity to meet several targets under the Sustainable Development Goals, like ending hunger and achieving food security, ensuring healthy lives, reducing inequalities, making cities safe and resilient and sustainable. Urban agriculture can begin to play a central role in communities by supplementing the local food supply and creating spaces for community building, advancing larger community health and sustainability goals. As Christine mentioned, our mandate at Green Venture is to empower Hamilton residents to implement greener practices in their homes and communities to make our city a climate champion. Green Venture has had a long-standing history with gardens in Hamilton. In 2005, a prototype community garden was established at the current Eco House, which it's a beautiful place if you haven't visited. It's about 2.5 acres of gardens, lush with different pollinator plants and different energy efficient demonstrations on site. And so they established the current Eco House Garden as a test run for developing community gardens across the city. In 2011 and 12, Green Venture developed the Hamilton Community Garden Network, the HCGN, to include branding, outreach tools, and workshops with support from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the City of Hamilton Public Works, Public Health Services, and many partners. And today that's what if you're familiar with Neighbor to Neighbor. Neighbor to Neighbor helps facilitate some of that connection with the community gardens. So to date, 800 pounds of fresh produce have been donated by backyard gardeners to help reduce food insecurity. We've reached an estimated of 6,000 people per year interested in gardening and having a greater opportunity to making healthier, greener choices. Now, these are the programs that I get to work on with our community, helping to facilitate that knowledge sharing at events like CD Saturday and other workshops. CD Saturday usually takes place in February, so in the middle of winter when gardening season seems so far away. We currently manage about 45 community garden plots, including our very own Eco House Community Garden. And we work to reduce food miles and increasing food security through our Grow Row program, where backyard gardeners commit to growing an extra row of produce to donate to Neighbor and the community fridges Hamilton. And later on, I will provide some information on that, on how you too can get involved in some of that work. And then we also maintain the Hamilton Seed Library, which is a hub that serves for sharing, borrowing, and donating seeds at no cost. And mostly because we know that saving and sharing seeds is crucial to preserving genetic diversity. Before moving forward to the next bit of it, I would really like you to sit with the idea that home gardeners can be an important part of the solution when it comes to climate change. Plus, gardening's fun, it's peaceful, even when you're pulling weeds. So I have a question on here, and what herbs do you like? And I believe that we can launch a few polls just to know what your herb buying habits are and what that looks like. And if you're here today, I'm guessing that you are interested in gardening, and whether you're a new gardener or a seasoned gardener, herbs are a valuable asset to any garden. So unfortunately, I can't see the poll results coming up. I'm on a tablet. So anyways, if you're like most people that I know, sometimes we buy all these herbs in the grocery store because we need a recipe and it calls for maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons of herbs. And then a week later, you realize that the herbs are wilting and drying out in the fridge and have gone to waste. So growing herbs is a really good way to also help reduce that food waste. So what herbs do you like? So the first step in herb gardening is really to decide that. What herbs do you like? That's really going to drive your planning, and what do you want to grow so that we can help reduce that food waste. Like if I don't like cilantro, I'm not going to grow it, right? So the history of herbs. So herbs are usually grown in those temperate regions. They can be annual or perennial, and later on we'll talk a little bit about what annual perennial means. So herbs are really useful plants, so considering how you would like to use them is a great way. So learning about the history really does change a little bit about perspective of reason why you should be growing herbs. So some spices like anise, mustard, saffron, cinnamon, they're documented dating back to 1550 BC. That's a little bit about that history there. There's an ancient Egyptian scroll, the Ebers Papyrus, listing plants used as medicine, and it serves as evidence that herbs existed up to 3,000 years ago, beginning around that 14th century before ocean exploration advanced. And when we look at the history, we see that there was spikes in spice trade, and spice plantations were being established in other locations. And we start to see a little bit of that history that those who controlled the spice trade are those who got rich. And if we look at the numbers in 2020, spices were the world's most traded product. They ranked on about 500 on that list, with a trade worth of 3.61 billion, with top producers being China, exporters being China, India, Netherlands, Germany, and Turkey. And in 2020, the importers of spices were United States, Netherlands. But so why am I bringing this up anyways? So we won't get too deep into this food system and what a food system means, but have you ever considered the origins of your herbs and spices? Oftentimes we don't. We consumers aren't thinking about that farmer in India or the seller who's buying it from the farmer or the importers, etc. But these all acts have a footprint. So when we begin to consider these factors, we begin to think about supporting fair trade and making more sustainable, ethical choices, like reducing our food miles, and really begin thinking about our food systems and perhaps seeking alternative food systems, like gardening. So that's a lot to take in, but it's all up from here. So here comes the fun part, and actually planning your garden. Most gardeners and cooks would agree that an indoor herb garden is worth that effort for fresh ingredients. And factors to consider in that decision-making process include time, space, effort, and money available to invest in the project. But overall, enjoying fresh herbs in a meal, I think it's worth the effort in most cases. Usually it tastes a lot just richer. So there are major advantages to growing your own herbs, like the quality, the taste, and just the sense of pride in eating something that you grew is one of the most rewarding things. And I think that's what really drives me as a gardener, is that richness of a fresh tomato or fresh cilantro. And then on the other hand, growing your own herbs isn't totally free of an effort. It does require your time and maintenance, and most importantly, it requires consistency, right? And some cost upfront can add up, but I think it's important to use So that's why I think it's really important to use what you have rather than going out and buying all of these things. And hopefully later on I can give you some of those tricks on using what you have. But overall, I think it's a really good idea to grow your own despite those cons, mostly because there's been studies. A study of 146 herbal teas found that 1/3 of herbal teas generated DNA ID not found on labels. So that's something to think about when you're purchasing those teas and those spices. If you're growing it, you know what you grew and what you put into your soil. So really elevating that quality of those herbs. And with there being an increasing interest in growing herbs, a lot of that might be for medicinal uses. But I do want to add in a word of caution here that seek some medical attention. Talk to your doctor before using medicinal herbs. Medicinal herbs can come in several forms: ointments, oils, capsules, tablets, and teas. So it's always really good to just consult with a medical professional and to really research it, or with anyone who's involved in medical care, and that comes with a lot of just foraging and things like that are becoming a little bit more mainstream. But there are some dangerous plants out there like castor bean. It contains ricin, so really deadly. So really be mindful of those herbs that you can see growing and wanting to taste that. So before getting into all the growing, it's really important to talk about plant type categories. So we have your perennial plants, which will dive to the ground at the end of each growing season and then return next year. So that can be lavender. Your annual plants, those die back and you have to reseed next year. So cilantro. And then you have your biennials, which will live for 2 years. The first year they produce some leaves, and then the next year they grow to maturity. And an example of that is parsley. So our first herb on the list of herbs to grow is mint. Mentha. There's many species of mint. It's a perennial that produces new foliage all year long if the stems are not killed by frost, making it one of the easiest herbs to grow inside. There are hundreds of different species, hybrids, and cultivars of mints. The fragrance of mint is energy boosting and invigorating. So that's why they put it in things like toothpaste to wake you up, right? Mint needs enough light and consistent moisture. And if you already have a mint growing in a container or in the ground, or if you have a family member who does, it's easy to dig up the plant, pot it up, and bring it indoors. On the top right, you can see this little picture of just one single mint branch. You can take a cutting from that and then remove the leaves and then place it in water until roots grow. And then you can plant that and have that mint plant start to establish itself. So that's a really easy way to get mint. Ask your neighbor before stealing their mint if they have a big mint. And then just a word of caution, mint, and I wish I would have known this my first year of gardening, but mint is not very friendly in the garden if you plant it directly in the ground, because it does become a little noxious taking over your garden. So it's really good to actually have mint growing inside. And next on the list is Basil ocimum. Several species and several varieties of basil. They thrive in well-drained, nutrient-rich soil. Basil does not tolerate water stress, so making sure that your pots provide adequate drainage is really important. It should never be soggy because basil is really prone to rotting. So when we'll get to watering a little bit later on, but usually when I water, a good rule of thumb is to check with your finger or something. And if it's about 2 inches deep and it's dry, then it's probably a good time to water. If it's still a little moist, don't water your plants. And that's pretty standard. But the most important thing for basil is good drainage and lots of light. Now, to begin growing chives indoors, you can fill a pot about 15 centimeters. Clay pot would be best with well-draining potting medium, which would be pre-moistened. So we never want to really plant in a soil that's completely dry. We always want to give it a good watering before. So with soil, if you water it and pick it up with your fist and it clumps, that's a good sign that your soil has taken enough water. And for a winter crop, you can try digging up a small clump after the foliage dies back in the fall, and then plant it in a container and bring it indoors to a warm and very bright windowsill. But chives, they're pretty hardy in the frost, so they're perennials. They'll come back year after year. Some folks in our garden, they can't even keep up with the chives the way that they keep dividing and just spreading through the garden. So that's another trick that you can implement in your own garden if you already have chives growing or know someone who does. But if you are going to be bringing it from the outside, it's always really good to wash those roots out. And making sure that you're providing really good humidity. So humidity and air. And with any of these plants, putting on a fan just nearby your plants really helps them provide air circulation to get that, mimicking the wind, making them strong. Our next plant is lemon balm. And lemon balm as a house plant is really a great idea because the lovely herb offers a beautiful lemony aroma, and it's a tasty addition to food and drinks. I love plant for a sunny window ledge. Now, with the reminder here is that if it does begin to flower inside, you can always just pinch the flower off, and that'll help prevent some of that flowering. But the key here is lots of light, and you'll start noticing that that's key for a lot of our plants. So here you have two photos. On the left, you have lemon balm, Elisanalis, and then on the right, you have lemon verbena. So the main difference between these two is the fact that they're unrelated plants from two very different parts of the world. Lemon verbena is from the Verbenaceae family and is a South American herb, while lemon balm is related to mint and it's a European herb. So that's why when we put lemon balm in the garden, it also spreads very intensely. So lemon balm is really a good container plant. But on the plus side, it's really shade tolerant, more so than the lemon verbenum. And you can distinguish the lemon from lemon verbenum by its rounded, wrinkly leaves on the low, and it's low growing, the lemon balm. So although both plants have that strong lemon scent and flavor, have a stringent tone, whereas lemon verbena is more floral. So cilantro, it's one of my favorite herbs. And it is possible here to not like cilantro. A lot of people don't like cilantro. It's not a coincidence. Perception is linked to genetics. There is a gene, OR6A2, the gene receptor with binding specialty for several aldehydes that contributes to that soapy taste. And then just to note on cilantro, it's possible for one plant to provide an herb and a spice. The plant cilantro, Coriandrum sativum, the leaves are used as the herb cilantro, but the seed is a spice, coriander. So if you see a seed pack that says coriander, that's also cilantro. So to grow cilantro, ultimately, again, sun is key. You want to have this plant exposed to sun for about 4 to 5 hours per day. It can also be used under growing light, and most likely you will have to have a growing light to provide sufficient light for this plant to be successful. So just a quick recap. Our top 5 picks are mint, basil, chives, lemon balm, and cilantro. And I know I got through that really quickly, but I just want to shift really quickly and challenge a bit different and consider having native herbs. Consider the biodiversity and health of native plants and ecosystems. From the Native Herb Conservation Committee, the term native herb refers to mostly seed-bearing, generally fleshy annual, biennials, and perennials, aromatic or useful shrubs in this country without the influence, accidental or intentional, of man prior to European settlement. So today I want to introduce to you 2 species. They may or may not be familiar, and that's Monarda Fishtalosa, also known as Bergamot. And these 2 plants that I'm going to introduce to you were voted notable native herbs in 2013 and 2018 due to their unique properties, utility, history, and potential for uses. So Monarda Fishtalosa is a mint. It's edible, it's herbal, it's citrusy, it's sharper in flavor and wonderful for cooked applications like chopped in salads, and really good for teas. The individual petals of bee balm flowers pull out easily, and they can be dried to make this beautiful red tea. It's really quite stunning. It's drought tolerant, ranges in colors, and it's really loved by bees and visited by hummingbirds. It adds wonderful value not only for yourself but ecologically, and it's really a fun way to have fun with your plants. Bee balms grow anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall, with petite varieties growing 10 to 15 inches tall. With its height and spreading characteristic, a 5 to 10 gallon pot is needed. So for those of you growing on balconies, this is a really good plant to have on there. Be sure that the pot is crack proof, weather resistant, and has good drainage holes like a resin plastic container. And then placement of the container is important as well, because bee balm likes full sun and good air circulation. So patio, balcony, or an open deck areas are really perfect for this potted bee balm. Now, you can easily winterize bee balm in the fall as well. So Salvia, also known as sage, there's about 960 species of this herbaceous and woody plant, also of the mint family. Plants in this genus, Salvia, are herbs, shrubs, and subshrubs, and they're generally perennials and really aromatic, also really good for our pollinators. Some species are really attractive to it are hummingbirds, but they are mostly pollinated by insects. So many of them are, like I said, they're known as sage, and they're used extensively as culinary herbs, ornamentals, and medicinal plants. The leaves and the flowers can be either raw or cooked, and it's a very common herb that it's strong aromatic leaves. They're used for flavoring food, and they aid in digestion and so often used with heavy oil foods. But again, if you are using any of these herbs to aid in any medicinal qualities, make sure to consult with someone. But sage has a very long history of effective medicinal use, and it's an important domestic herbal remedy for disorders of that digestive system. And it has antiseptic qualities that make it really effective for any sore throats. But just another word of caution, the plant can be toxic, so when used in excess or extended periods of time. So again, consult with those medical professionals, they know best. So really the key is light, So I'm just going to go back. So really the key is light for this pot as well. No further than 15 inches away from a light source. So there are many ways to garden, but for the sake of this presentation, I am going to focus a little bit more on container gardens and community gardens. And really with containers, what you're looking for is good drainage. None of those pots that don't have a hole on the bottom, those are no good. Stay away from those, steer clear. Especially if you're you know, planting indoors, because the water will just kind of sit in that pot and then waterlog your plant, and then you'll just have a rotten plant. So terracotta pots are best, but plastic, wood, or metal will do fine if you're indoors. And then for balcony gardening with containers, choose plastic. They won't crack like terracotta or ceramic if it's left outside in these freezing temperatures. And if you prefer wooden planters, choose cedar, as it's also really lightweight. And just to know, I know that a question came in about how do you keep a herb garden from getting out of control? And really that's just containing it. So plants, like I said, like mint, they spread by growing roots from stems that touch the soil. So making sure that you're containing that rapid growth, and by harvesting. So when it comes to having no balcony, that is not a problem. While it does limit your apartment gardening options, it shouldn't be enough to stop you if you really want to garden. There are some pictures here on this slide. You know, there's these really fancy things that help you grow in an apartment. From the left here at Lee Valley, that can range from $500. But I encourage you to use what you have. If you have a table light and a table, this middle picture here I took from a Houghton Master Gardener. All that you need is really a light source and a tray to grow your seedlings. And then this top right picture here is a planter that you usually hang out in the balcony, but these really make really good planters for windowsills. And then you can get creative on any shelving, really. You can use a cart or an existing shelf and add extra lighting, and just put some trays and start growing your plants on that. But the key here really is to make sure that the location that you choose in your apartment can handle, like if you're using this herb planter on the windowsill, making sure that that window box is secured to the windowsill and that it can hold that additional weight of soil and water. And if you're gardening on a balcony or rooftop, checking with your landlord or building board about weight restrictions. And then I'll get to it in a little bit when we talk about watering and making sure that we have those watering trays so that we're not making messes everywhere in our apartment. And that's pretty much the gist of growing in containers inside your home with no balcony. It's really doable. That's really how I started my journey. I started growing a whole bunch of tomatoes in individual pots along my windowsill. I too have no balcony. I have no patio. All I have is a windowsill. So when I started my journey, I knew that was an issue. So I started looking for community gardens, something that wasn't really familiar to me. So Neighbor to Neighbor would be the directory, the place to go to find a community garden near you. I think there's a link that we can pop in the chat for Neighbor to Neighbor, and that's their community garden directory. To date, they have 65 community gardens in this directory, and it's really, really simple. You just look at this map, find what's nearest to you, and it'll give you the information of a community garden that's near you. It'll give you an email or a website. Sometimes they don't have a website, just because community gardens are usually run by volunteers, or like a coordinator like myself. Those would be the ones that do have garden emails. So once you find a garden that's next to you, I would recommend that you choose maybe 3 to 4 gardens that are next to you, because unfortunately there is cons to this community garden, and that's that a lot of these gardens do have wait list. So if you find a garden that you like, try to get on that wait list as soon as possible. And then it's possible that within the next months or the next year, you get contacted. So yeah, get on if you don't have access to space, this is a really good, but yeah, and make sure you get on that wait list. And also, this wasn't a method, but if you have family members who have a patio or a balcony that's underused, you can also try to pitch them too, and see if you can if they allow you to grow a tomato or 2 on there, or herbs. So now we're going to get into a little bit about the soil and water. I think as new gardeners, sometimes it can be really bogging when you start hearing about mixing your own soil and vermiculite and perlite, and then you have to feed your plants nutrients and nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. But don't let this get you down. There are soils in the market that will do just fine. There's lots of varieties out there, but and they'll range probably about $9 or so. So the one that I usually use is this Pro Mix Premium Organic Vegetable and Herb Mix. It contains compost, it contains perlite, really everything you need for your little vegetables and herbs to grow. This other picture here, the Fafard, I've never actually used this brand, but it has been recommended by a Halton Master Gardener. So also a good choice. And like I said, they range you about $9 or so. So don't let all of these soils on the market bog you down. If it has compost, if it has a core or a peat, and perlite, that's really what your plant needs. Now, I've been talking a lot about lights, and really I can't stress it enough. It's one of the most important elements for thriving indoor plants. All plants require light for photosynthesis, the process within a plant that converts light, oxygen, and water into carbohydrates, which is essentially energy. The plants require this energy in order to grow, bloom, and produce seed. So when your plants lack light, they don't produce chlorophyll, which is that green pigment in your plants, and then plants can turn into this pale green to yellow to white, and eventually to dying off. So before getting a plant or starting seeds, really sit back and determine the quality and hours of natural light in your space, and then choose plants with light requirements that match your indoor environment. And you can always add artificial lighting to make up for that lack of natural sunlight. And then once you have an idea of the available light in your space and the plants you'd like to grow, then you can decide to add supplemental lighting. If you know you have a window that always gets sunlight, stick to that. Now, the most common types of lighting include LED and fluorescent bulbs, but you may also see like high pressure sodium bulbs when shopping around, and there's pros and cons to all of these. For LED, the pros, it's really energy efficient, long lasting, and then it has like a wide variety of spectrum of light. They don't produce a lot of heat, and then there's lots of styles and sizes. And the con is sometimes they say that the con is really like it's a higher upfront cost. Like this one on the top here, it can range you about $100, but this one on the left, you can source this even at the Dollarama. I've seen them before. Now would be a good time. The Dollarama's putting all their gardening stuff, but you can get these LED lights at, your typical home hardware for about $4 to $5. So it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. So going back to that one picture with the lamp and the tray, that's my setup now. So that really can work wonders. So when it comes to watering, trays on the bottom are really key. Sometimes you can get this to really low cost, or you can already use containers like sushi platter containers. You can just use that as a tray. That's really what most of my plants are sitting on. I really love that. Yeah, so you can really get creative on the types of trays that you use. And then the key here is not to water from the top. If you're watering on the bottom trays, that's going to be really helpful for your plant, because that water is going to sit there and provide a little bit extra humidity as well. Whereas if you're watering from the top, you can leave your plant susceptible to disease like molding and that white. Sometimes you can see some white, molding on your plant. So that's usually as a result of watering the leaves of your plant. So where do you get your seeds and your plants? I am going to do a shameless plug that Green Venture, we are having seedling sale on May 14th, which I will share in a few slides. And then there is a list of directories, which we will also provide in the resources, of Canadian seed companies provided by Seeds of Diversity, but some really good ones are William Dam, West Coast Seeds, Matchbox, Mohawk Seed Keepers, all really good places to get your seeds. And then of course, please check the Hamilton Seed Library. It will cost you nothing. And then when you go shop, and also there's no shame in buying already established plants. That's really good for starters. But when you are checking your plants at your nursery, make sure that you are checking your plants, looking underneath the leaves and making sure that you don't see any visible pest or diseases. Yeah, so keeping that in mind when you're shopping for seeds and plants. And then just a quick note on seeds: do not fear buying seeds that are GMO. Some seed packs and retailers, they market it as GMO free, but they're just adding to that misconception that the contents of the seed packet can actually contain GMOs. They can't, because GMO varieties are super patented and protected and restricted. So I'm just mindful of time, and I still have a few more slides to get to. So I'm just gonna quickly go through this. Just so when we're harvesting, we really want to look for these nodes. So that's where the shoots, new growth comes off from. So pinching that node, pinching it and harvesting there will allow for new growth to come. And then when we harvest, you can if you see this picture, it has 1, 2, 3. That's usually where you would pinch, and then still allow for new growth. But if you want to harvest a little bit more, you can also just cut off the whole stem. And I don't think you can see my cursor, but you can cut off a whole stem too for harvesting. And then if you aren't just using your fingers to pinch off the node and you're using some type of pruners or scissors, it's really important that you just sanitize your tools in between plants and from stem to stem, because you can also kind of spread pests and diseases that way. And really you can do that just by applying alcohol or something. So the quickest and my favorite way to preserve herbs is by drying. Simply tying and hanging bundles upside down for 1 to 2 weeks will give you lots of great herbs to store. Make sure you're picking it on a dry morning before the heat of the day. And then if you're collecting it for seeds like coriander, covering the seed head with a paper bag so that the seeds can fall in there. And then when we are storing our herbs, making sure that we're using an airtight container, because any oxygen can degrade the herbs over time. So storing your herbs, your dried herbs in that airtight container is best. Glass jars or metal tins with screw top lids work well, as do those clamping lids. And then avoid using plastic if possible. Some people say that it can leach chemicals into your herbs. And then storing it in a cool, dry place so that the sun rays aren't degrading the quality of their herb. So storing it away from direct sunlight. And if you have a dark colored jar, that's even better. And then this is pretty neat. If you struggle from losing those fresh herbs in your refrigerator, you can always chop and that excess and freeze it in ice cubes or oil even, and then you can just pop these cute little ice cubes out of your freezer. And then the most important thing when we are doing this is to kind of just labeling on our jars, the names, the date you harvested or the date you purchased and the date you store it on it so that you know what you have. And then just important reminders, light is key, can't stress it enough, monitoring your water, and then just making sure that you are having fun and just trusting the process and enjoying the journey of gardening. So that's me. My contact information is here. garden@greenventure.ca is the easiest way to contact me. I am currently training under the EFAO, so I'm still learning. And I'm always learning. So it really is important to know that throughout your whole gardening journey, it's just constant learning and just, trial and error. I've had my fair share. And then Green Venture, you can find us at greenventure.ca. We have lots of great events coming up. Doors open May 7th, a D-Pave where you can volunteer, put some planting in there. And then our Spring Garden Festival, you can come check out the seedlings that I have grown with our co-op student. And yeah, that's it.
So instead of that's all she wrote, that's all she planted, we can say.
Yeah, that's it. I kind of got through that last part a little in a hurry, but yeah, just mindful of that time there. Went a little over, but.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you. And we have lots of questions, so why don't we delve right in there?
Sure. I'm just going to take a drink of water.
Of course you can. Please do. So after or before you were talking about what type of light bulbs to use, there was a light up in the chat. I think you answered it, but I just want to confirm it needs to say, so people were like, oh, LED or but it needs to say grow on it, because what you showed was specific growing lights because it has the full spectrum.
Yeah. Sometimes it does say that grow on the light, but really any LED light that has kind of that just fluorescent will do. But like I said, try to save your money and just go to the Dollarama. If you and you can see behind me, like that's what I'm using. Like this little lamp here, it's a cheap IKEA lamp, and I just have that LED grow light in it. It's about purple, like it's like a purple shaded color, and cost me $4.
Okay, perfect. How about someone asked, how about the SAD lights, for the seasonal affective disorder? Can you use those as well?
Good question. I've never tried, but I'm sure that you might be able to. I'm not sure if it's like what type of lights those are, but if you give it a try, please let me know. I'll have to do some research on that. I don't see why you wouldn't be. If it's bright, it's light.
And it might, because I think it's supposed to mimic the sun. So maybe that is, although I think those are quite expensive. So along the same lines, sorry, everyone, you probably see me darting, looking around back and forth. I'm looking in the chat. I'm looking at Sheila. I'm looking at the Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to put those either in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm monitoring both at the same time here. So regarding natural sunlight, someone is asking, Ellen is asking, is a large southern exposed window sufficient for winter growing, or is an artificial light source also needed?
Yeah, so I'm going to be honest here. I don't really bog myself down with if it's south facing, north facing. That's a little too complicated for me. If that south facing window is getting about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, your plants should be able to be okay. But if you are concerned, I would definitely look into getting that artificial sunlight for sure. And then another trick is to just plants want to follow the light, right? So sometimes we often see our plants leaning. So making sure that we're turning around our pots really will also help them lean towards the sun, or get that adequate amount of sun on all parts of the plant.
Thank you. So light and turning. So a question that may have been answered that Julie asked, and you mentioned something about mold growing on your herbs when you water them from above. So Julie was asking, can you tell me when you get a chance what the white stuff is that appeared on my rosemary last year, and how do I get rid of it? Is it edible? So I'm thinking that's probably mold, but
that's a little tricky. I would have to see a picture of what it is, because sometimes some little creatures leave like a trail of slime that's white. It looks kind of bubbly. If it's specifically white on the leaves, it could be powdery mildew. So I would have to see a little bit of picture to see exactly what that white was on the plants. But feel free to send an email to Garden at Green Venture, and I can help you out there.
Thank you. So hopefully, Julie, and if you didn't get that, I can send that when I send out the link. Oh, just so everyone knows, because people have also put this in, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link in a few days once it's been closed captioned and uploaded. And all of the links that I put in the chat, I'll also include in that email for you, so that you will have all of that information. So someone is asking, Mary is asking, is it all right to let your herbs flower?
It is if you want the seed. Otherwise, if you let it go to flower, that means that it's probably too hot, and the herb will probably become more bitter in taste. So usually we try to prevent our herbs from going to flower unless we're saving the seed.
Interesting. Okay, hopefully that answered your question, Mary. So along that same line, Anne is asking, how do you prevent cilantro going to seed?
Yeah, so cilantro can go to seed really quickly, especially if we're planting it out in the summer, just because it will go to seed and bolt with hot temperatures. So planting cilantro when it's a little bit cooler, like right now, would be ideal for cilantro. And then when you do see the flower coming off, just simply pinching it off, you can make sure that you have a little bit more of that fresh, better tasting cilantro herb. So just pinching it off right at the node.
Obviously, Anne is not one of those people that has the gene that
yeah. I'm sorry if you do have that gene. I love cilantro, and I couldn't imagine not liking it.
Me too. Okay, so a question, is there a good partner herb to grow in the same pot with rosemary? So far, thyme and tarragon have not survived, but the rosemary is growing very well.
Nice. Then the rosemary probably doesn't want to grow with anything else. Maybe try a flower, maybe try a marigold and see if that works. I would say that. I just can't think of it at the top of my head, but rosemary does grow well with some other plants as well. And then just going back to the cilantro really quickly, reminder that cilantro, the seed is coriander. So if it does go to flower and you get seed, you can also just blend up the seed and now you have a spice.
I did not know that about cilantro and coriander. I love them both. So if you have that gene, that means that coriander also tastes like soap to you?
Good question. I'm not sure.
Because that's a pity, because coriander is like so delicious to enhance in food. So if anyone has that answer, feel free to throw that in the chat.
I'm not sure.
So Deanne is asking, so she just purchased, first of all, she says, great presentation, thank you. She just purchased 2 basil plants and 1 mint plant from her nursery a couple of days ago. Now she hasn't put them in a new pot yet, but they seem to be drooping. What are your thoughts? Oh, and she has
Yes.
it, sorry, in a north facing window, and it's been watering each day and the soil feels fine.
Okay. So when we get a new plant from a nursery, and we bring it home, sometimes it does do that just because, I mean, in a nursery environment, it's in like its ideal environment, the temperatures are controlled. So it is normal for a plant to kind of go into that little shock and start drooping when it's new. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you said that you're watering every day, I'm not sure if that was the case. If you're watering every day, don't water every day. Really, you should only be watering when that soil is really dry. So making sure that it's like, doing that finger test, right? And if it's dry to the touch, then maybe water, but try watering from the bottom as well, not on the top. That can help as well. And then, yeah, just be patient with your little plant. And then a good thing to know when it's ready to go into a new plot is if the roots are just really like tight. So it's root bound in the pot really tight. So if you see roots coming out, that could also be an indication that I might need a new pot. But yeah, I wouldn't put it outside just yet either. It's gonna be freezing tonight, so don't do that.
Probably for a little while, unfortunately.
Yeah.
For all of us in this area.
Yeah, but yeah, don't let that get you sad. It was in its ideal environment, like I said, so give it some time.
Okay, so back to cilantro. So if it's grown inside, can it last for years or will it only last for 1 year?
Yeah, good question. I personally haven't tried to grow cilantro indoors. I usually do grow it outside. So my guess would be that you could probably push it for about a year or two. Yeah, but I will have to double check on that question.
Okay. So Eva's asking if, you said not to water stuff from, or not to water your plants or your herbs from the top. So if not watering from the top, what's the proper way?
Yeah. So like I said, getting a tray, putting that on the bottom, putting your water on the tray, and then letting the plant absorb it. If that's not an option and you want to water from the top, because sometimes that's just a little bit more like time. Just time is a factor, right? Sometimes we're all guilty of watering our plants from the top. If you are doing that, just make sure that you're getting it to as close to the base of the plant. So base meaning closer to the soil when you are watering, that versus like watering directly on the leaves.
Okay, that is very good advice. So, because I guess you want it to be as close to the roots is what you're saying.
Right.
Right. Okay. Apartment balcony. So any tips on how to grow herbs on an apartment balcony? They don't get consistent sun through the day, and also how to keep squirrels and bugs out. So do you put a light outside on the balcony?
Yeah. You could add artificial lighting to the balcony. That might become a little bit more complicated. You might have extension cords running through. But again, that's kind of case by case, right? Like, what are the conditions? Are you getting a lot of wind? What floor are you on, right? Things like that. But yeah, you can definitely add additional lighting outside. Yeah, it's all, like I said, it's all really trial and error when it comes to gardening in those conditions.
Trial and error and adventure.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what, if you don't have like luck growing something that really loves that light, start looking for alternatives that like shady areas or things like that.
Yeah, maybe it's just not in your fortune to have the herbs that you want to have if you don't have the optimal environment, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes we kind of want to force things to grow where we want them to grow, but that's not always the case, right? So sometimes we just have to see the environment and pick the plant that's suited for that environment.
So we have some questions on tomato plants. So the first one is, how do you get rid of mold on tomato plants? And then the second one is how to determine pot size for indoor herbs and tomatoes.
Yeah. So for tomatoes, it's two things. It's watering, like I said, making sure that water is not getting on those leaves of the tomatoes, and then providing air circulation. So making sure that we're trimming off the excess leaves of our tomatoes, pruning those off, because usually that's really what leads to those like that mold, right? Is not having good airflow on your tomatoes. And then with choosing the right pot size, bigger is better. Usually we see these fancy little pictures of like these tiny 4-inch pots growing herbs. That's not going to get you far because herbs like to grow out with their roots. So if you do have a bigger pot size, that would definitely be best. And that's the case for herbs and for tomatoes too. Indoors, you can try growing smaller varieties like dwarf, like tiny tins, right? Those won't require such a big pot, but we'll be able to provide tomatoes.
Wonderful. So we have, I think, time for one more question and then we'll wrap it up. So Julie asked, so she has oregano and it's spreading all over. Advice to stop this. Also, do you happen to know about sprouting and where to put the seeds for that?
So oregano, also like mint, is a spreader. And I think the best thing to do when it comes to helping control some of that spread is to snip the flowers off, because then that's when it goes to seed, right? And then you have seeds everywhere and more seeds, more plants. But start just hacking at it if you don't want the oregano anymore. Just to start pulling it out, or also just put the oregano in a place where you don't mind it taking over. It's quite a lovely plant, right? But yeah, that's my best advice for oregano plant that's taken over. And then the second part I didn't catch. What was that?
That was about sprouting. So you're going to want to live near Julie because Julie's going to give oregano to all her neighbors. Excuse me. So the second part was, do you happen to know about sprouting and where to put the seeds for that?
Yeah, no, sprouting. Where's that question at?
It's the first one in the Q&A.
Sprouting word. No, unfortunately I don't know much about sprouting. But my guess really would be to check on those Canadian local companies. William Dams probably has something about that. If you're talking about like microgreens too, like there's a lot of different microgreens you can grow, like sunflower seeds and just cut them for the microgreens, things like that. But yeah, Julie, definitely also share the wealth of oregano to your neighbors for sure.
Okay, so I think and how about buying seeds. Sorry, buying seeds for sprouting.
Yeah, buying them. Yeah, I would just check those seed companies. Seeds of Diversity has a really extensive list of Canadian seed companies. And then Julie also about Doors Open on May 7th. All the most of the historic buildings in Hamilton's will have their doors open. Eco House is one of them. You just from 10 to 4 drop by. We have a tour at 10 to 1. You can find more information on our social media.
Wonderful, and I can put that in the email that will be sent out as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. Now you are going to be able to host wonderful barbecues, dinners, picnics with your friends and your fresh herbs that you can bring with you to all of these events, using Sheila's wonderful knowledge. So thank you, Sheila, for joining us this evening and imparting your wisdom. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for asking some wonderful questions. I wish you good luck and a green thumb. And look for that email from us in a couple days. Today is Wednesday, so maybe Friday or Monday. Feel free to check out our other events that we have coming up next week. This is all part of our Rejuvenate series. And that is all. So thank you very much, everyone, and take care.